So I wonder if you can picture with me an old man standing on the side of a slope, a mountain. He's quite weathered. He's actually lived for over 40 years in the desert. His face is leathery like, it's wrinkled, quite dry. He's 85 years old, but there's a strength to him. And in fact, he's on a mission. You get this sense, even watching him, that he's looking very intently at this particular mountain, and there's a gleam in his eye. He's focused on where he's going. I want to come back and talk about Caleb in a couple moments. Let's back up just for a moment and kind of set the scene for where we've come in the last couple of sessions together. In our first session, we talked about running our pace, running our race, running with grace. And we've been dealing with this subject of asking the question, actually, are you leading or reacting? Is your direction established? Do you know where you're going? Or are you just kind of running in circles? And in a cycle of reacting to the situations around you instead of taking ownership and leadership. I looked at some evidences of that lifestyle in the last two sessions 2 and sessions 3. We talked about being very busy and being proud of it. We talked about just being caught up in putting out fires all the time, having our energy drained, just always feeling worn out, and having no time to meditate, to get quiet. You can't get quiet because you seem like your head's always racing ahead. Somehow in the process becoming satisfied with just second best, just survival. Second best is good enough. And then feeling like you want to give up, just looking back and remembering how things used to be. And finally, being motivated by fear and not by faith. My challenge is let's stop imitating the hamster. Remember the hamster is that guy who loves to run. He runs all night long for hours. He can cover 6 miles in one night, but he's not getting anywhere. And I want to challenge you that if you know what your purpose is, if you know where you're going, then you can take steps toward that by the daily decisions you make every single day, day after day. And I want to look at 3 keys, actually 7 keys over the next 2 sessions, but today, the first 3 keys of what it means to live an intentional life. What does it mean to be intentional about our life? Having a proactive lifestyle. The first one is this: you are living intentionally when you have a hope and a picture of the future. That's why I introduced Caleb as I started this session together. Caleb is just an inspiring man to me. We were introduced to him actually back in Joshua chapter 14, but then later we catch up, Numbers chapter 14, but then later we catch up with him in the book of Joshua. In Numbers, he's being sent by Moses into the promised land to spy out what it was like. And while he was there, he discovered a mountain, the mountain of Hebron, in fact. And when he came back and reported to Moses, he asked for a promise. I want that mountain. He had faith that there was going to come a day that they were going to overcome the obstacles. They were going to reach the mountain of Hebron. We find ourselves now, years later, 45 years later, 40 years in the wilderness, 5 years of conquest in the land, and now in Joshua chapter 14, verse 10. Joshua 14:10. Here's what Caleb says. And now, behold, the Lord has kept me alive, just as he said, these 45 years since the Lord spoke to me his word through Moses when Israel walked in the wilderness. Behold, I am this day 85 years old. I am still as strong today as I was in the day that Moses sent me. My strength then is now as it was for war and for going in and coming out. Think of that now. 85 years old. He says he's strong, he's focused. Why? So now give me this hill country that the Lord spoke to me on that day. For you have heard on that day how the Amalekite was there, great fortified cities. It may be the Lord will be with me and I shall drive them out, just as the Lord said. I'm inspired. In fact, I'm excited by the testimony of Caleb. 85 years old, still strong, ready, and he recognizes this is not going to be easy. There are enemies I'm going to face, but I've got a promise from God. In fact, let's just back up a little bit to verse 6. Joshua chapter 14, verse 6. Here's what the Bible says. Then the people of Judah came to Joshua at Gilgal, and Caleb, the son of Jephunneh, and the Kenizzite said to him, you know what the Lord said to Moses, the man of God, at Kadesh Barnea, concerning you and me. So how is it that the people, his family members, know about this promise? Well, I think it's very simple. He's been studying this vision. He's been meditating on this vision. He's been recounting and sharing this promise for 45 years with anyone who will listen, but certainly with his extended family members. Remember, in the Bible, when we say family, we mean in-laws and outlaws, the clan, basically. And he had a hope. He had a direction. He knew where he was going. And because he had a picture in his mind of this wonderful mountain, the valleys, the fields that were there, all the preparation that was being made, he could go for 45 years of struggle, of difficult life, waiting for that promise. Do you have a hope? Do you have a future? Do you believe that God's given you a promise that you're living for? I've had the opportunity to travel in Europe several different times over the years, and I've always been intrigued, inspired rather, even by the great cathedrals of Europe. These amazing buildings that were built hundreds of years ago. None of our sophisticated tools or machines today, built by hand. Sometimes it took upwards to 100 years to build these buildings. Now, picture this. When they began building those buildings, the men involved knew they wouldn't be around for the finish, but they made preparation. In fact, one of the things they did, as they laid the foundation, they planted a grove of trees. I guess it was often oak trees or another hardwood that would be used in the future for the doors and for the windows, the other parts of the building that would require wood. They knew it would take 50, 60 years to grow these trees. So they put them in the ground as they laid foundations. They were looking forward. They had a picture, they had a vision, they had a direction. I wonder, are you living for something in the future that's been promised to you by God that you can lay hold on? That'll take you through difficult times. That's number one. A hope. You know you're living intentionally when you have a hope and a picture of the future that God has promised for you. Number two, you know you're living intentionally when you find fulfillment in being, not just doing. Now, here's a challenge, because our culture, our value system of this world is all based on doing, what you accomplish, your accomplishments, what you've done, what you can list as your victories, and I'm suggesting that doesn't really bring fulfillment, because, as we've said before, it's so easy to compare yourself with others and find others that have done much more than you have. Real fulfillment, I believe, comes from being, what's measured by what's on the inside. Identity is more than just activity. Identity is more than just activity. And so our identity comes from what's inside of us, including our gifts, our calling, our values, the accumulation of our life experiences. And we could spend hours talking about each one of those things. And in fact, if you go to our website, you'll find some materials that'll maybe help you on that. But I just want to say this right now. There's only one you. That combination of all those inward qualities. Again, we know that we're unique on the outward. Unique fingerprints, unique iris, unique DNA, of course. But I'm suggesting it's what on the inside that really counts. Your personality, your habits, your areas of weakness, your unique creativity, your hobbies, your passions, your skills, your ability to imagine. What you imagine is very different from what I imagine. Each one of us are unique and special. And when you discover that uniqueness, who you are on the inside, and begin to live it out, following the call of the Lord, that picture that God's given you, then you'll find fulfillment. Let me define fulfillment this way. Fulfillment is not measured by tangible things, but by what you value, by the intangibles. And I define fulfillment this way. You know you're fulfilled when you have obeyed our Father and leave the results and the glory to Him. When you're following Him, when you're walking with Him, when you obey Him, and again, I'm suggesting every single day, hour by hour, obeying the Father's direction, our Lord's direction for our lives, then you find fulfillment. And of course, that protects us from competition. I love these verses in 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 26. 1 Corinthians 1:26. Paul is confronting those in Corinth who were comparing him with other leaders and suggesting, oh, I want to follow this one. I want to follow you, Paul. No, I want to follow Apollos. He said, no, wait a minute. Consider your calling. 1:26. Consider your calling, brothers. Not many of you were wise according to the world's standards. Not many were powerful. Not many were of noble birth. Does that feel familiar to many of you that are watching right now? But God chose what is foolish in the world to shame the wise. God chose what is weak in the world to shame the strong. Wow. Now, I must say, I get comfort out. I get encouragement out of that verse, because I certainly can find other men that are much more qualified than I am. But I am who God's created me to be. He's given me my own unique combination of gifts, calling, values, life experiences. Here's what Paul sums up the chapter in verse 31 saying. So as it is written, let one who boasts, boast in the Lord. Now, that pulls it all together. I'll find fulfillment when my boasting, when my joy, when my glory is given to God. So how do I know I'm living an intentional life? Well, number one, I have a hope. I have future. I know I have a picture of what God's promised for me. Number two, I'm finding fulfillment in being, not doing. Number three, you know you're living intentionally when you're leaning forward. Now, I want to suggest that every single one of us will be tested at some point. And we're going to stumble. The key is when you stumble, when you're confronted by adversities, when you recoil, do you fall forward or do you fall backwards? I'm challenged by the story of Jacob as he wrestled with a man, it says in the book of Genesis chapter 32-31. Unusual. He seems to be the angel of the Lord or the Lord himself. And as he wrestled through the night, the Bible tells us that as the dawn began to rise, that the man called out to Jacob and said, let me go. I need to leave. I need to leave. And Jacob said, no, you're not going to leave me till you bless me. Now, this is quite a challenge because obviously there's something special, something spiritual going on here. And indeed, as they culminate their wrestling, the promise is given. I'm giving you a new name, in fact. A name speaks of our identity, of our being, who we are, not just what we're doing. And in the process, the Bible tells us, this man touched the hip, this special pressure point, no doubt, on Jacob. He's touched his hip, and as he rose, he limped. Hence, I've often said, I feel strength when I follow a leader who has a limp. In other words, when I follow an individual who's been tested, who's gone through difficult times, who's learned how to fall forward, not fall back, but fall forward on the grace of God, fall forward on the situation around them, learn from the difficulties, and not give up. I guess I want to ask, what is your limp? Do you remember that time, and maybe even recently, when you were tested and hit hard by situations around you? Maybe it was criticism, maybe it was finance. It can mean any number of different things. But what was your reaction? Did you move forward? Did you fall backwards? Obstacles are opportunities. And in those opportunities, we have to choose, will we lean forward or we look back? I'm inspired by the testimony of Joseph, who knew what it was like to be tested, put in a prison, criticized, a promise given that this would never come to pass. If supernaturally, Joseph goes from that prison to becoming the prime minister of all of Egypt, and in the process rescues his brothers, his family, which was, of course, what he'd been promised in a dream many years earlier. When his father dies, his brothers are petrified. What's Joseph going to do to us now? Genesis 50, verse 20, has to be one of my favorite verses. Genesis 50:20. As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring it about that many people should be kept alive as they are today. I hope that can be your promise when you're tested. Will you fall on the Lord? Will you find strength in God? And can you sincerely say, wait a minute, you might have meant, the enemy might have meant it, those people around you might have meant it for evil, but God is able to use those things for his good and for his glory, if you fall forward and don't shrink back. So, 1 Corinthians chapter 9, verse 26, Paul says, I do not run aimlessly. I do not box as one beating the air. Paul says, I don't want to run just helter-skelter. I want to be going somewhere. We've looked at 3 keys for getting there tonight. Having a picture, a vision, a direction, a hope in what God's got before you. Knowing that you can be fulfilled in who you are. You don't have to be someone, you don't have to compare yourself to someone else. And then finally, this whole idea of leaning forward when you're tested, growing through your difficulties by the grace of God. Thank you, and God bless you.